Every experienced ranger in Yosemite knew the unspoken rule. If you found the scattered stone charms near the remote lakes, you left them there. No questions asked. August 15th, 2005, Park Ranger Gary Keating, blinded by grief and fog, broke that rule at Grouse Lake, and within hours he would discover exactly why those charms had been placed right there. What follows is a series of dark events where, through his better judgments, Gary felt drawn to this lake and the secrets that he was certain lay within it. And he soon found that curiosity came at a price. Unlike grief, it didn't ease with time, but instead it flourished. This is Gary's only account of what really happened to him, which he told to psychiatrist Sally Littlefield at the Mammoth Hospital just days after it happened. And in this world, it is so often the case that darkness is drawn to sorrowed souls, and sorrowed souls are drawn to darkness. This is Gary's story. I always found myself craving the outdoors, the smell of fresh air and pine trees. Nothing beat that. Yosemite has always been a backdrop to my life, and I couldn't imagine ever living somewhere not framed by these mountains and these tree lines. Even now, after everything that happened, I wouldn't want to give that up. Not that view. The wilderness, it's as beautiful as it is deadly. I used to think that it was just beautiful and boring, but how wrong I was. Out there, secrets are rooted beneath the earth, and they are coursing through the bark and the leafy veins. And the more secluded the place, the more secrets seem to thrive within its boundaries. And as a park ranger, I should have known better than most, but back then I found myself oblivious to the whispering secrets. My life changed at the beginning of the year when I lost my son, Liam. And the grief of losing a child, it's unexplainable, so I'm not going to try. He was 28 years old, and he was a troubled soul. He didn't always make the right choices, despite my wife Helen and I's countless attempts to try and sway this. When I was headstrong as a child, my grandfather used to say to me, "You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink." And I suppose, as much as I don't want to admit it, in this equation, Liam was the horse, and I felt like such a failure as a parent and as a man. And I had to take time off work. But being at home drove me mad. I replayed the past, just questioning every little decision that I made, and I couldn't take being inside with those voices and the nagging doubts anymore. So I went back to work. And Helen thought it was too soon, but she knew there was no convincing me otherwise. The outside world reminded me of how vast the world really is, and just how small I am. On this particular day, I parked in the Bridal Veil Creek and I checked into the ranger station, and I began the trail there, embracing this contrast of feeling exposed in the open terrain to disappearing beneath the overgrowth of trees. And this weight, it seemed to lift from me as I walked, as though some of the guilt was flaking off of my skin. And I don't know, maybe there was something in it. There was something to stepping out of my own head and just being free. Work helped me start to feel like me again. I walked in this daze, checking in on my radio as required and listening to the buzz of the cicadas. By the time I reached Grouse Lake, something had changed. I am not sure what. I had been there many times before, and yet now, as I looked at that docile blue water in this long stretch of trees and the mountains beyond that, I felt this unexplainable pull toward the water. And I sat on the grassy bank, and I drank from my iced tea that Helen had made for me, and I don't know why I started to cry. I wasn't an emotional man. Helen will vouch for that. 35 years of marriage, and she's never seen me cry, not once. I couldn't remember the last time I cried. I hadn't cried when I lost my father, nor even when I lost Liam. And now the tears seemed to pour out of me, and sniffling them back just made them worse. I let them stream out in the end, and I wiped my tears on my shirt and on the grass. And it was as my tears began to subside that I first heard it. This whimpering sound in animals, but it was the wrong pitch to be a coyote. More like a young dog. Our pup Baxter used to whine just like that when he was a puppy, and he didn't like being left alone downstairs at night, and Liam used to sneak downstairs to be with him, and I couldn't help but always chuckle when I caught them both curled up on the dog bed. But yes, this pup sound, it was persistent, and it sounded like it was coming from the lake. It really puzzled me. I rubbed my ears. I was thinking that I was hearing things, but then as I walked around the lake, I continued to hear this whimpering cry, and I checked behind the trees and the rocks. I mean, anything else I could think of, but it didn't make any difference. The sound was coming from out in the lake, and it was an arduous 9-mile hike back to the ranger station, so I knew I better get going or else I'd be stuck on the trail all night. And it may have been summer, but the sun still set deceptively, going from light to darkness without much grayness in between. And I set off. The dog's whimper was replaying in my head, and back at the ranger station, I didn't tell anyone about what I heard. And when my colleagues asked if I was okay with patrolling Grouse Lake tomorrow, I found myself agreeing. I tried to push what I heard out of my head, and this turned out to be easy to do, as tiredness seemed to find me. I guess my emotional outburst had drained me. And the next day, I checked into work, and then I drove to the Crabtree Trail parking lot, the closest trail to the lake, but still a trek. And I began on the Crabtree Trail before veering off onto the Grouse Lake Trail. And I arrived at that lake without any problems. I sat on that rock and I stared out at that lake as I ate my lunch. I didn't want to stay too long and risk another outburst of emotion. It wasn't that my sadness ashamed me. It's more like I just didn't have the energy for round two. It was a clear summer's day with not a cloud in the sky, and then suddenly I was surrounded by this thick fog. I could barely see my fingers through it, and it masked over the entire lake. And I stepped backward. I was using my flashlight to try and guide me away from this strangeness. And as I walked across the grassy bank, this whimpering began behind me, and the same young dog sound that I'd heard the previous day, it sounded distant at first, as though it was coming far, far across the lake. And I rushed forward as quickly as I could in that darn fog, wanting to put as much distance between me and that lake. And the whimpering, though, continued as I kept on walking, only I was so disoriented. The fog, it saw to that, and I tripped over my own feet. I fell to the ground. I was grazing my hands on something. It was a rock, and causing this small pile of stones to fall over and scatter all around me. I was in the trees surrounding the lake, but I don't even know how I managed to get that far. The fog seemed to tighten in around me, and the whimpers came in bursts from out there in the lake. A splash sounded in the water, and I thought it was a person. I shouted, "Hello, is someone there?" And then silence followed, and the fog began to clear, enough for me to see my fingers clearly without the flashlight. And this large rock in front of me, with symbols carved into it, and the stones scattered around me, almost diamond in shape, but with these rounded, smooth-looking edges. They're not stones at all, they're charms. Rangers, we saw them from time to time, usually in spots just like this, away from the main trail. We knew better than to interfere with them, but just in my distress, I managed to walk straight into one, and silence surrounded me. But the fog was clearing, and I told myself it's okay. I even started to chuckle to myself as I placed my grazed hand over my thudding heart. I didn't know what was going on, but I thought it was over. God, I was a fool to think that. I thought about picking the stones up, and I decided just to leave them there. I whispered, "Sorry," and I pulled myself to my feet. And that's when I heard the whimper boom directly behind me, this haunting sound echoing in my ears with such force and surprise. I jerked backward, and I must have knocked my head into the tree. I don't know how long I was unconscious for. All I know was that when I came round, it was dark out. My flashlight was flickering on the ground just ahead of me, and I heard this constant static sound coming from my radio. I grabbed my radio. I was trying to call in, but it was as though the buttons were jammed. The static sound just continued. I pulled my aging body over to my flashlight, knocking it to try and settle its flickering, and that didn't work. So I was in this flickering light with a static-sounding trance, and it felt as though I wasn't in Grouse Lake at all. I was in another world, one where silence tickled at my senses. I knew I couldn't hike in the dark, so that meant I was stuck until first light. So I fumbled in the flickering light to try and get away from that rock that I'd disturbed. The whimpering voice knew where I was, So in my scrambled mind, I thought if I moved I might stand some kind of a chance, so I found this yellow pine tree, and the branches were bent slightly and sheltered beneath it, and feeling so small against its wide orangey brown trunk. And I cleaned my hands and the back of my bloodied head with an antiseptic wipe, and then I wrapped a foil blanket around my shoulders. I had enough water to last me another day, and I had a couple protein bars, but I didn't dwell on that too much. The other rangers, they knew where I was. If the signal remained static, they would come and find me. So I just tried to get a little bit of sleep, as there seemed little else I could do. So I closed my eyes and I dreamed of Liam. He was pleading with me to save him. His eyes were full of sorrow as dream me shook my head. And Liam then started to whimper, this dog-like whimper just like Baxter used to make, a sound that altered into something more human. I opened my eyes with a start, and the sound was echoing around me. That distant cry of a young child was coming from the lake. And I instantly thought of Liam, and I knew I needed to save him. I grabbed my flickering flashlight, I left my backpack there, and I hurried toward that lake, and I called out, "Liam, it's okay, I'm coming, Dad's coming." Then I waded into the water, boots and all. The urgency to rescue my boy was overwhelming. I didn't even feel the water around me, I just felt emptiness. The cries were continuing, these desperate cries of a young boy, and I waded in. The water was reaching my calves. I stopped, and I stared down at the water. And with each flicker of the flashlight, I saw only darkness, only dark waters with no promise of hope. I shook my head. I started walking backward, and then the lake fell silent. All I could hear was the sound of water rippling as I moved. And I was about to step on the bank, and then something came out of the water and grabbed my ankle. It was this hand, just like a child's, icy cold, and I froze in horror as it pulled me back into the water with this unexplainable strength, and I must have tripped, and I landed half on the bank and half in the lake, and the crying sounded out as I felt his hand pull me into the water. And I dug my fingernails in the bank. I was pleading for it to stop. The child's cries were turning into laughter now, child's playful laughter. I clung onto the bank for my wife's sake more than mine. I couldn't allow her to lose me too. But God, a part of me felt like by holding on I was letting Liam down. I knew the boy wasn't him. Not really, but it was in my mind. It was someone like him. It was the remnants of a lonely, lost soul, taken too soon and trapped in the abyss. My fingers were squelching through this muddy ground now, and then my head went underwater. And the flashlight that I dropped on the ground in front of me flickering in time to what I thought would be my demise. And I fought with the water. I tried to grab onto something, anything. The force pulling me was just too strong. The child's laughter echoed beneath the water, and I accepted my fate. And as I was pulled free of the water and I felt the grip loosen on my ankle, I didn't dare believe it at first. A Native American man loomed over me in a tan jacket with tassels on it. And as he laid me on the bank, he carefully peered down at the water, taking something from his pocket, whispering words I didn't understand, and as he dropped what looked like some kind of dust onto the lake. And through my flickering flashlight, I saw it right there beneath the still water, this ghostly face of a child frozen in time, and its face was twisted, just twisted in the horrors that it had been as it faded away, becoming one with the water. And then silence returned. Maybe it never had left. The man helped me move further away from the lake, and I'd long since lost my backpack, so he gave me water from a flask, and he wrapped his jacket around my shivering body, and there were so many things that I wished to ask this man, but my mind was just frozen as my body. I don't know how much time passed before the first light seemed to streak through the trees, and he seemed startled by something, and he rose to his feet, and towering over me in a placid voice, he said, "You must not come here again. The drowned child senses your grief. Next time he will take you, but help is on the way." And he nodded at me. And in my mind, I nodded back, but I'm not sure if I actually did or not. I watched him disappear into the shadows, just as flashlight submerged from them. He'd been right, help is on the way. and my body seemed to just thaw out, and then I felt this gnawing, aching on my ankle, the spot where I'd been grabbed, and I rolled my pant leg up enough to look, and I gasped in disbelief. Even in the bleak light, I could see it. That small, icy imprint where fingers had gripped onto me, and I was staring at them as the search team's voices came toward me, calling my name, and I took one last look at that lake before they led me away. I didn't hear the whimper, not a dog's or a child's, and I didn't see that man ever again, and not seeing something doesn't mean it's not there. Grief and pain can't be seen, but they're real. What happened to me was real, too. I'm not certain of much in this world, but that I am certain of. Gary Keating was taken to the hospital and given a physical and psychiatric examination. He had hypothermia, a concussion, minor injuries, including the unexplainable mark on his ankle. And Gary's account of what happened was recorded as being due to the recent loss of his son. As an experienced Yosemite Ranger, he knew the stories of Grouse Lake, including the most famous account journaled by Galen Clark, Yosemite's first guardian. In it, Galen recalled hearing a whimpering sound at the lake, and on mentioning it to Native Americans, he was told that these were the cries of a boy who had been drowned there. They warned him never to go close to that lake, for fear that the ghostly boy may try to pull them under the water. Authorities believe Gary fabricated his own versions of events to cope with his loss. However, this didn't explain the clear outline of a handprint on his ankle, far too small to be an adult's, but too indented to have come from a child. Nor did it explain how the tasseled tan jacket that did not belong to Gary came to be around his shoulders. Gary retired from being a ranger, but continued to live in his California home with his wife Helen, and it was only recently, on Helen's passing, that Gary disappeared. A note was left on his kitchen table, held in place with a stone, saying, "I am ready now." The same day that note was found, a hiker at Grouse Lake discovered a pair of boots, later confirmed to be Gary's, and a flickering flashlight on the grassy bank. The lake was searched, with no results. Gary Keating has not been seen or heard from since. Gary's story ends here, but the questions it raises linger on. Sometimes the line between grief and the supernatural becomes impossible to see. If you felt that pull toward the unknown, that mixture of dread and curiosity, there are more accounts waiting in our archives. Subscribe to ensure you are here when we uncover the next one. And please share, and I'll see you in the next video.